Ever since I was a kid, I have been terrified of the closet, its darkness shrouding whatever secrets it holds, but really more menacing is the fact someone has been talking to me through the door. The voice being a mere whisper, the sound slowly fluttering into my ear, almost as if there was nothing at all. The only time it was quiet enough for me to hear it was at night. I usually would be tucked into bed, falling deep into my slumber when the faint sound of mumbling would erupt around me, the moon shining through the seeps of my blinds as my eyes would spring to life looking around the room. Haunting shadows dancing around my peripheral, urging me to stay in bed. To say the less, I was a bit frightened. The first encounter was bewildering for my innocent brain. I didn't know what to think of it other than I was hearing things, though being a child of 7 years old my imagination burst to life. After shifting around endlessly in bed, trying to fall back to sleep, the voice got a little louder, forcing me to finally give in to its will. I crept out of bed looking for the source of noise, the dimly lit room revealing nothing other than darkened silhouettes staring at me as I aimlessly walked around. I fell to my knees and looked underneath the bed. Only a void could be seen, and for a moment I visualized an arm grabbing me, pulling me in. That's why I had finally detected it, my head turning from side to side, listening with such intent. I turned my body to the edges of my room. The voice was calling to me from the closet. Still on the floor, I cautiously crawled over, my knees brushing up against Legos scattered around, my breathing heavier than the earth itself. I sat in front of my closet for a few seconds, staring up at the door, a monolith that was at my age. The voice filtering through the wooden door as I contemplated of what to think. My first thoughts were of wonderment, remembering the story of children escaping to Narnia through their wardrobe. The idea of having such an adventure as my parents slept enticed me, and I pressed my ear up against the door trying to figure out what the voice was saying. Muffled gibberish. I still couldn't figure out what they were saying. I was too small to fully comprehend such words, but in the moment I could have sworn whoever was talking was speaking another language. Hello? I whimpered through the door, looking behind, making sure my parents weren't awake. To my astonishment, the voice promptly stopped, silence encapsulating my small room. I think whoever was on the other side heard me. See me as chuchas? Ayudar me, the person said, the tone sounding like a man, his words unknown to me. I stood to my feet and curiously placed my hand on the doorknob. The thought of entering a wonderland of magic swirled around my mind when the voice once again spoke, this time more with a frantic tonality. Sí, abrir la puerta, open the door. He was asking for me to open the door. He wanted to be let in. I began to turn the knob slowly, not sure what to expect other than the wonderful world of Narnia on the other side. The door clicked open with such a vibration, once fully turning the knob, and I carelessly opened it. The door creaking open as pure darkness flooded into my already dark room, the void darker than anything I had seen before. The emptiness swirling around me left me feeling as if I was drifting away in space, fear grasping at my small mind, and I felt tears slipping down my face. "Where am I?" childishly cried out. No response was given, no sounds could be heard. I was no longer in my room, but in a vacuum of desolation. My mind began to slip away as all things became blurry, and I felt my body grow numb. I could only imagine at that age that this is how it felt like to die. Eventually, all things ceased to exist, and I fully blacked out, given into whatever this force was. I awoke the next morning on the floor, my body halfway in the closet, my father calling out to me asking what I was doing. I sat up dazed to where I was, my brain taking several seconds to register I was back in my room as the sun blared in through the blinds. I looked up at my dad. He displayed a befuddled gaze, perturbed that I wasn't in my bed. I didn't know what to tell him other than I had a weird dream of someone talking to me through the closet door. My father laughed and told me it was just my imagination, that no one lives in the closet. I turned back to look inside the mystifying closet as his words simmered in my ears. Of course no one lives there, that would be impossible. That was my first experience with the closet. I didn't hear any more voices for the next few months, feeling as it was all just a dream, one that I hoped never to have again. Though, as the weeks passed, I noticed a slight change in my father's words, his speech patterns slightly altered, just enough for me to catch it. It almost sounded like he had an accent, his words at times muffled, as if he wasn't talking in his native tongue. My mother didn't seem to notice, so I figured it was just me. I never mentioned it to anyone, not to my friends or family, and especially not to my father. Instead, I beavered away in my room each day, not wanting to leave or play outside. I would just sit in front of the closet with its door closed, talking to it, asking for it to bring back my dad, the one I had before the dream. After several months, I had gotten my wish. Like the time prior, it happened in the middle of the night, when my mind was shifting between our world and the dream one, the shadows that would dance around in my peripheral, all too eager seeing me enter their realm of existence, and that's when the whispering started, my eyes shooting open. The person living in my closet was back, and I quickly jumped out of bed, walking to the door. "Hello? Is my dad in there?" I asked the void that existed on the other side. Like before, the incoherent mumbling stopped. A raspy voice much different from the time before called out to me, "Open the door." I stood bewildered, not sure what this meant. It didn't sound like my father, nor did it sound like the person from before. That's when a vague sound started coming from the door. It took me several minutes to understand what the noise was. It familiar. It was the dire sounds of scratching, like the ones my cat would make whenever it scratched at its pole. Whoever this was on the other side was scratching at my door, asking to be let in. "Open the door," it once again called out with its withered voice. "Where's my dad?" I asked it, but I was never given a response. I only knew that opening the door was the one way I could ever find my father. My heart began beating through my chest, the rhythmic thumping sound filling my room. I gripped the doorknob tightly like before, and a sudden wave of energy flowed into my body. I felt defeated, as if there was no other choice than opening the door, and I turned slowly, feeling the vibration as before pulsate my small arm. The darkness crashing into my room, slithering up the walls like a slug from the depths of hell, and soon my mind was lost once again out into space, all things becoming void. I remained crying, hoping that somehow I would collide into my dad, reunite with his strong presence, and like before I blacked out, falling to this realm of emptiness. I awoke on the floor, my body once again halfway in the closet. A voice that sounded much like my father from before, called out to me, and I jovially arose to my feet to see the man I loved so much was back. His voice sounded the way it was supposed to. I believed it to be my real father, and I ran to him, hugging him tightly. He was confounded. He couldn't understand why I was acting the way I was, but hugged me back, asking me why I was sleeping on the floor. I didn't have a good answer for him. I was too young to manifest a response that would have given him clarity, so instead I told him that I must have fallen off the bed. I felt his stare linger as his curiosity morphed into concern, but luckily he had left it at that, and we went down for breakfast. Going down the stairs, I noticed right away that something was different. The furniture looked off, but only slightly. My cat's scratching pole wasn't in its usual place, but I tried brushing off my uneasiness and headed to our dining area where my mom had prepared breakfast for us. I saw that the back door was wide open, which I thought was odd since we usually kept it shut, not wanting our cat to escape. "Why is the door open?" I asked my father. He shook his head with annoyance, but not with me. Instead, he nodded his head towards the door, and I looked closer. I could see a bit of smoke flutter in the air as my mother walked in. It was clear even to my young age that my mom was outside smoking, something she has never done before. "Mom smokes?" I asked with pure amazement. "I know, it bothers me too, kiddo," my father said softly, not wanting my mother to overhear. She came in to sit at the table, join us for our usual morning breakfast. The stench of cigarettes stung at my nostrils as my mom passed by me. I wanted to ask so many questions, ask her why was she smoking, where was Whiskers' scratching pole, hell, where was Whiskers himself, but all that got pushed to the back of mind when I heard my mom speak. Right away I recognized it, the raspy tone in her voice. This person was not my mother. I avoided her for the next incoming weeks, wedging as much distance between me and whoever that person was. I begged the closet to give me back my mom as it did with my father, pounding at the door each day until my father had enough of my insanity and took the door off its hinges. I was devastated. Whatever magic the closet possessed was rendered null and void without its door. I cried most nights. The wonderment I once had of venturing into the world of Narnia dissipated as all I could ever think of was my mother's return. I would stare at the doorless closet, with the lights off, hoping I could see that dark void, but I would see nothing. If anything, the closet appeared to more illuminated. I asked my father if he noticed anything different about Mom. His face twisted into confusion as he paused his thought, digesting my question. It was clear to my father my mother appeared to be the same. I could only imagine how crazy I seemed to him, asking such a question. I asked for my door back, but it only angered him. As the months passed, the person that was wearing my mother's skin was short-tempered with me, constantly yelling at me for the smallest of things, and after a while I could see how suspicious they were of me. I could see in my mother's eyes whenever she would talk to me. She knew that I knew it wasn't her, and her demeanor towards me only became more cold. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to fix what was my fault. I should have never opened the door. I decided to build my own door out of construction paper, gluing together several pages, enough to cover the closet entrance. I crumpled up a piece of paper, shaping into a ball, and attached it to the end of a pencil, then pierced it through where the doorknob would have been. I waited each night with my homemade door, waiting to hear that voice, and after several days of constant repairs to my door did the voice finally come to me. The nights whenever I would hear the voices became familiar, as if the air itself was electrified. You could feel the small hairs on the back of your neck stand firm when the night was right. As it seemed to always, it came to me in the middle of the night. As soon as I heard the faint whispers, I shot out of bed, storming towards the closet, demanding the return of my mother. I was angry, sad. I longed for the warmth of my real mother, and I started to scream. That's when the voice from the other side spoke, it causing me to take a step back. "Can you open the door?" It was the voice of a child. Somehow there was now a kid behind the door. I felt apprehensive to opening it. I thought to myself in the moment what this meant. How could a kid be trapped in such an abysmal world? "Please, can you open the door?" it pleaded. I gulped heavy, gripping at the handmade doorknob, my sweaty hand practically slipping off the crumpled paper. "Please, just open the door," it called out again. I knew in that moment that if another kid could be lost out in the void, then it could surely happen to me, but I wanted my mother back, and I knew there was no other choice than opening the door. I turned the knob, it rotating with ease as the all-too-familiar vibration erupted up my arm, the endless void entering my room. I called out for my mother. As my vision became blurry, I started to lose consciousness, but this time I tried my best to stay awake as the darkness invaded my body. It didn't feel right to stay awake, like that wasn't allowed, so I eventually gave into the sleep and passed out. I awoke on the floor like I always had. Half my body was inside the closet as my paper door lay in ruins, it torn to shreds by what appeared to be claw marks. This time my father was not looking down at me with bewilderment. I was alone in my room, the sun barely revealing itself through the blinds, and I could hear noise coming from the kitchen downstairs. I felt tired. My body ached as I arose to my feet, and the little sun that shined into my room burned my eyes, causing me to rub at them. I tried to steady myself, but my balance felt off, as if the room was spinning, and I cautiously stepped into the hallway, grabbing onto the staircase railing for support. I quickly realized it was my mother that was in the kitchen. She was humming a song, her soft voice luring me towards her. In that moment I knew my mother was back. My homemade door had worked. I entered the dining area where my father was already seated drinking his morning coffee. My mother entered with a plate full of pancakes. They both looked normal, their voices carrying the same tone I could always remember them having. Whiskers sprinted across the room, mitts were brushing against my legs. Everything was back to normal, or at least I thought it was. As the days passed, I noticed there was something very different about myself. The things that would come to my mind, images that were never there before, dark ones, things no child should ever be thinking of. At first I tried brushing it off, understanding that my midnight adventures had perhaps messed with my imagination, making me more receptive to the darker nature of our world. Though I would constantly catch myself fantasizing about the most dreadful things, I grew a bizarre fascination with fire, staring deep into the flame of a lighter, lost in its amber beauty. Funny enough, my parents didn't seem concerned with me, or perhaps they saw nothing odd about my behavior. They continued treating me the same as they always had. It didn't take much to realize whatever I let it in had found its way into me. I could feel its presence in the back of my mind, its whispers asking horrid things of me. I contemplated about opening the door one last time, but I knew letting this thing that existed inside of me out would only be inviting a new one in, one that might take a hold of my parents once again. So I did my best to drown out the voice that plagued my thoughts, knowing that I was stronger than it. We were a happy family again, and I didn't want to lose that. As the years passed, I continued hearing the whispers coming from the closet, their dire pleas of wanting to be let in. I would just ignore them, closing my eyes even tighter, forcing myself to fall back to sleep. The voice in the back of my head only grew more ubiquitous, it becoming harder to ignore. By the time I had turned 16, I was a tormented soul. My anger had no bounds. I found myself constantly irritated, snapping out at my parents. I told myself I just needed to make it until I was old enough to move out. That's why I would try to let it out, but the voice came to me one night all too powerful, projecting grotesque images of what it wanted me to do. That night I killed my poor cat Whiskers. He was old and unaware. He didn't struggle because of the trust it had for me. I cried throughout the night of what I had done, the entity's laughter swirling around my mind, consuming my anguish for its pleasure. I knew I had no other choice but to let another in so this one could leave. I had given up to this creature because I knew what the monster wanted me to do to my parents. I waited patiently for the whispers to come to me, and it only took a few weeks, the sound of muffled voices awakening me out of my light slumber. Now being older, the feeling was a lot more different. The dark shadows in my room were no longer threatening, the moon showering my room in a blue vibrant hue. I stood to my feet, breathing heavy, the cold air tasting sweeter than before, leaving a tingling sensation on my tongue. The beast in the back of my mind calling for me to go back to bed. It knew what was coming. I could hear the eager voices calling to me from behind the door as I walked towards it. I gripped the doorknob in my hand, a cold shiver running up my spine. My head started to pound with intensity. I steadied my breathing, inhaling deeply as I turned the doorknob and cursed at the monster in my head. Go to hell, I told it. I opened the door, and like always the dark void of emptiness flooded into my room, swallowing me into its jaws as I felt my body grow numb. Though this time, something felt very different. My mind no longer grew tired or weary like it had before. My vision remained vivid as I began to gag on the darkness. I could feel myself wandering deeper into the void, deeper than I had ever been, and soon I found myself lost in a sea of nothingness. I was endlessly floating out into the darkness as I called out for anyone to hear me. That's when I heard other voices erupt around me, voices of different languages, some of men and some of women, all crying out for help. I couldn't tell how long I had drifted. Time seemed to fade away. I was connected to this universe, and my mind slithered through the darkness like a seal swimming in the ocean. I soon began to forget who I was, my memories, my life. I was gradually vanishing into non-existence as I mumbled away incoherently to myself like some crazy person. That was until I heard a particular voice, one that sounded very different from the others that had surrounded me. This voice sounded more alive. "Hello? Is someone there?" the voice called out to me. I stopped my mumbling when I heard the voice. It was one of a child. I tried turning in all directions, but only saw darkness. I outstretched what I thought were my arms, feeling around for anything, and that's when my hand collided into some solid. It was cold and hard. It felt like a door. I brushed my hand against it, trying to locate a doorknob, and finally I had found one. I turned it, excited that I had finally returned home, but to my dismay it was locked. "Hello?" the child called out to me again. I knew I had to say it. There was no other choice. I told the kid what I had heard many times when I was a child. I told him to open the door. The door opened slowly as a bright light encapsulated me in its glow, causing me to pass out. I awoke in a strange bed, next to someone I did not recognize, a woman who was still sleeping. I grabbed at my head as a painful throbbing pierced its needles at my mind. I didn't know where I was. The room seemed pristine. Things that I had never seen before stood in front of me. I carefully got out of bed, stumbling over some cord. I saw that I had knocked over what seemed to be a calculator. I picked it up, and the damn thing came to life, glaring the time and date at me, and that's when my eyes widened with amazement. I ran over to the mirror and almost screamed out with pure horror. The person looking back at me was not me. I was no longer a teenager, but instead a middle-aged man. The year on the small screen said it was 2024, but I last remember it being 1992, and I'd really been gone for 32 years. The house I find myself in is fully equipped with technology one could have only dreamed of when I was little. My father had a laptop for work, A heavy brick it was, but now I sit here with this thin as paper computer typing away of my experience. I've been trapped here for the last few months, hoping the voices from the closet would call out to me, but sadly they haven't. I need to find a way back, if that's even possible. I miss my parents. I miss the life I was supposed to live. I'm trying my best to adapt to this new world I find myself in. The woman that calls herself my wife is pleasant. She reminds of my mom, and the kid that calls me dad reminds me a lot of me when I was little, but I think he knows I'm not really his father. One thing really bothers me. I wonder what happened to the person of this body. I don't feel his presence at all. Did I kill him? I can only hope once I escape from here, this family will be reunited. All I can do now is dream. I was born around the Appalachian Mountain area. After I left school, I moved around a lot. A great deal happened in my life in the past 5 years. Recently I got a call that my uncle passed away. A simple cabin hidden deep within the woods and a truck was all that had been left of his life. After everything, I decided spending some time at the cabin would be a good idea. The cabin looked a bit on the rougher side when I arrived. My uncle hurt his back and wasn't able to do most of the upkeep for a while. I hadn't been there for years, and it took some time to figure out what I was doing. After 2 weeks, I got the small cabin back in shape. Since I wasn't in a rush to leave, I bought more supplies to stay a bit longer. It felt odd not having a schedule. For so long my life didn't change from day to day. I was stuck doing the same things at the same time to keep the bills paid. And in an instant that all changed. Gray threatening clouds started to roll in while I was fishing. I checked my phone trying to see what the weather would be like for the rest of the night. It didn't work half the time because I was so deep in the woods. It took 5 minutes for it to load up the information about a nasty storm. Packing up quickly, I booked it back to the cabin. That old building better hold against what was coming. It grew so dark I needed to turn on a lantern in the middle of the day. I made a note of how many unread books I had left and that I needed to pick up new ones when I was in town next. As I cooked an early dinner, the rain started to come down hard. The wind blew, rattling the windows. Thunder rumbled so hard I felt it in the floorboards. This was a night to stay inside and under some blankets. More lightning flashed and I glanced outside at the right time. If I had been a second too late, I might have missed something that would change my life. A person was limping along outside fighting the storm. I rushed to grab my jacket and get my shoes on. The instant I opened the door, I became soaked. It was nearly impossible to see with the rain pouring into my eyes. By some miracle, I spotted the figure again. He looked so damn small out here beside the massive trees that made up the forest. Pushing on, I reached him through the rain. I shouted only to have my voice get carried away by the wind. He struggled a little as I guided him back to the cabin, but we finally got inside drenched and shaking from the cold. For some reason, he was dressed in a simple robe that appeared to be made of a natural material. He looked young, maybe 16. I fetched a blanket off the couch to wrap it around him. The poor kid shook so hard his teeth chattered. "Where did you come from?" I asked him. His lips pressed together in a tight line. He refused to say anything. I carefully guided him another step inside, and his legs gave out from under him. A puddle of water formed from the rain dripped off us. The water looked too dark in the dim light. I soon discovered a fresh nasty gash on his leg. Since he was so thin, I lifted him to carry him over to the couch. I did try calling for help, but my phone didn't connect. Then I did my best to treat the wound with the supplies I had. Where did he come from? Was there a weird cult in the middle of the woods? It wasn't as if that sort of thing hadn't happened before. From how riled he looked, I decided not to press him for answers. Stay here for the night. If I make you uncomfortable, I can sleep in the truck, I said after I wrapped his leg. I stood up and his hand flew out to take mine. He shook his head but hadn't spoken yet. Gray eyes begged me not to go outside again. I promised I wouldn't leave him. He needed some dry clothing. Some oversized sweaters and sweatpants would need to be good for now. I didn't sleep well that night. The cabin had 3 rooms. A main room, a bedroom, and a bathroom. I let him sleep in the bedroom as I took the couch. Ideas of where that kid came from and what happened rolled around in my brain all night. I wouldn't get any answers until he decided to tell me. The storm finally died down before dawn. I passed out for a few hours, feeling more tired after I woke up. The first thing I did was knock on the bedroom door to see how he was doing. When no answer came, I opened it a crack. The bed appeared slept in but empty. He wasn't in the bathroom, so did he run off? Fear raced through my stomach until I opened the cabin door to see the boy from the night before outside stretching. At least his leg looked to be all right. "How are you feeling?" I asked, not expecting to get an answer. "Better," he responded in a deeper voice that didn't match his face. "Do you want to head into town for a real doctor to look over your leg?" I said, and he shook his head. "No, it'll heal on its own." The cut looked worse than it is. He pulled up the pant leg to show off the long cut along his leg. I must have been seeing things last night. I could have sworn it was twice as long a few hours before. "What's your name?" "I'm Dean." Again, I wasn't expecting him to answer, and yet he did. "I'm Hemlock." Yeah, with a name like that he was totally a part of a weird cult that lived in the woods. Would I need to kidnap a random kid to get him away from an abusive family? "Do you live out here?" I said, a bit suspicious. "Yes. I'm a part of a small family that has lived in the mountains for years. There are a few different families around here. A fight broke out and well, that's how my leg was hurt. I'm sure the issue has been resolved." I crossed my arms, not liking what I was hearing. My uncle never said anything about other people living near his cabin. How far out were they? How many people? I knew it wasn't my place to look down on how people live just because it was different, but I worried about any issues that kind of lifestyle may bring. You don't have, like, a main leader claiming the end of the world is going to happen and then takes like 10 wives, right? I suggested, hoping being so upfront wouldn't scare him away. The kid laughed, which put me a bit more at ease. Who would ever need 10 wives? Isn't one when you're ready enough? At least that reaction made me think there was a chance Hemlock was doing all right living in the woods. Then again, his name was Hemlock. Unless I saw how he was living, I wouldn't be certain he was safe or not. I nudged at the dirt, wondering if it was my place to stick my nose into his business. "Where do you live? When your leg is a bit better, I can drive you there." I nodded towards the rusted truck my uncle left. Hemlock chewed on his cheek, unsure of my offer. He shook his head, trying to think of a polite way to refuse. "We would need to walk. It's far into the forest and there are no roads. I'll be fine to return on my own. I would like to do something to repay you for your help." I shook my head, but it didn't look as if he would accept the lack of repayment. I thought for a minute, wondering if there was anything I could ask him to do. "Let's go fishing today." It was an easy chore that would keep him off his injured leg. I had 2 rods, so we didn't need to share. After collecting the gear, we walked down to the lake as a chilly wind blew. It cooled down a lot from the rain. The path had become so muddy I was having issues with getting my boots stuck. Hemlock walked barefoot. Even with an injured leg, he didn't have any issues not sinking into the muck. We found a good spot by the lake to get set up. I needed to show him how to bait the hook and explain what the bobber and weight did. Apparently, his family just caught fish with their bare hands. He was going to do the same, but I told him it wasn't a good idea to give lake water in his open wound. I wanted to talk a little, but found it hard to get a conversation going. "How old are you?" "Like, high school age?" When he gave me a blank stare, I elaborated. 16? Younger? "I'm an adult," he said, sounding offended. "Not to me. We got distracted by a bite from a fish." It turned out to be too small, so it got tossed back. I caught Hemlock watching me as if he wanted to ask a question. When he noticed he had been caught, he opened up about what was on his mind. Only parents think I'm younger than I am. And you seem very protective of me. Do you have any children? He cautiously asked. A son a few years younger than you. Hemlock's face lit up. He half expected to see another kid his age appear at any moment. I bet he easily made friends. Will he be spending any time at your cabin? No, he's with his mother. I replied, hating how cold my tone sounded. Hemlock knew to drop the subject and felt awkward bringing the whole thing up. He made things better between us by snatching a fish who had foolishly gotten too close to the edge of the lake. By lunchtime, we had enough fish for dinner. I'd caught 2 while Hemlock caught 6 by baiting the water and grabbing victims before they knew what was coming. I insisted he stay for dinner. It seemed like he was ready to run off at any moment. I offered to cook while he cleaned up. The smell of the lake clung to his clothing, which he hadn't noticed. The cabin had its water system. I wouldn't have been able to stay out here for as long as I had without hot water. I showed Hemlock how the shower worked, but said he could also have a bath if he preferred. I cleaned and deep-fried the fish along with a few side dishes from whatever canned goods I had around. My guest came out of the bathroom dressed in more borrowed clothing, his cheeks still red from the hot water. The soap smelled too strong for me to use. Hot water is such a nice treat. It's such a hassle building a fire to warm up water that we don't bother doing it very often. My eyes narrowed at him after I set down a plate of hot food. Was it healthy to take cold baths all the time? Maybe I did need to see what kind of place he was living in. Hemlock dug into his food, unaware of what he had just admitted. For a small guy, he ate a lot. Having a full stomach and a bath knocked him out. I cleaned the dishes as he slowly drifted off on the couch, promising to get up soon to help me clean up. I had planned on letting him sleep through the night and then making sure he got home safely the next day. Sometimes things just don't work out the way you want them to. It had gotten dark when Hemlock started to stir in his sleep. A noise came from outside. It was as if someone was walking just in front of the cabin. There shouldn't be anyone around in the dark. I grabbed the rifle next to the door and stopped to listen. The gun had belonged to my uncle, and I hadn't fired it before. I knew it was still loaded from when he had been alive, but I hadn't found any spare ammo in the cabin. A soft knock came. I tensed as I started to reach for the doorknob, the gun in my other hand. If the person wanted to cause trouble, I was positive I could deal with it. Don't! Hemlock shouted from the couch. I just turned the doorknob when he spoke up. The wooden door exploded inwards, knocking my body a few feet back. My entire body heard as stars danced through the darkness. My head slammed against the wooden floor, stunning me for a full minute. I climbed out from under the door, rifle still in hand, but my body refused to stand. 2 strangers stood inside the cabin. They were dressed in sewn together dirty rags. Their bodies were tall and bone-thin. One had a hand with long fingers wrapped around Hemlock's arm to start dragging him towards the open doorway. "Let go of him," I said through gritted teeth and raised the rifle. The one man turned his head to show a long grin. His mouth appeared unnaturally thin. His dark eyes were set into a skull-like face. "Oh, how cute. Let's take this one too," he said in a raspy voice. "No. You know the deal. We do not involve outsiders," Hemlock nearly begged. The man fully turned around to face me, his movement stiff as if a corpse had started to walk. "He sheltered you. He is no longer an outsider," the stranger pointed out. I didn't care about what they were talking about. I just needed to get these 2 the hell out of my cabin. He has a family. If he goes missing again, Hemlock was on my side. Both the men laughed. The sound chilled my spine and caused fear to run through my body. The taller of the 2 of them looked over me. The dark eyes see something no human should be able to. No, he doesn't. The shorter one spoke in such a wispy tone I could barely understand the words. Then he spoke clearly, but not in his voice. No, the voice of my wife came from him. I'm going to my sister's for the weekend. I'm taking Pumpkin with me. Call me when you're done work. That was what she said in her last voicemail to me. How did they know that? Did they somehow get to my phone while I was at the cabin to hear it? When the taller one spoke, it said something no one should ever know. Mom is going to take me for some driving practice after school. We might be Dash. I pulled the trigger before he finished speaking. I couldn't bear to hear my son's voice coming from that creature's mouth. My hands trembled too much for the shot to hit. I couldn't even focus enough to see if I could use the gun again. My stomach turned from guilt and rage. How did they know what to say? And how did they sound exactly like people they shouldn't have ever met before? Both cackled, enjoying my pain as Hemlock's face fell. A clawed hand reached around to take his face under his chin to painfully lift it upwards. Look at what you did. You let a human get involved with us. Now we must eat him. Not only that, but you got your silly father killed by attacking us first. His eyes widened, unaware of if the creature was lying about his father's death. I looked around, trying to see if there was a weapon I could use. The rifle was useless aside from being a blunt object. I needed to get us the hell out of here. I no longer cared about who these two were. The important thing was how to get away. You're lying. You attacked us. We only defended ourselves. Our tribe has abided by the agreement since it was made. Why would we ever go against it? He protested, sounding like the scared kid he looked like. After you're dead, then it'll be our word as proof. The winter was very hard on us. I fear the next one shall kill more of our kind. So, be a good little boy and don't fight in the same way your father did. We don't want to damage such a nice coat a second time. That was enough to get Hemlock to fight back. A set of fangs appeared in his mouth as a deep growl rumbled through the cabin. He bit down hard on the hand that had held his chin. While those three were distracted, I rushed over to the other side of the room to grab the longest knife I could find. The taller man closed the distance between us in 3 steps. I turned on my heel to plunge the knife right through his body. To my sheer horror, it didn't even slow him down. His long fingers easily tore through my shirt to dig into my stomach. Pain ripped through my body as I struggled to keep a scream down. I found another knife to try and stab it into his eyes. I missed and hit his neck instead. The blade poked out clear through to the other side with black blood pooling from the wound. The creature's eyes grew darker and mouth widened to his ears. With ease, he tore open my flesh, his hand reaching inside to grab whatever it could. I screamed then, unable to deal with the pain and horror of the situation. For a moment I thought I was going to die from this thing ripping out my guts. Another scream came from the cabin, but it wasn't from me. The other creature started running towards the door with black blood spilling from where its arm should be. He was tackled to the ground as sharp teeth found his neck. Within seconds, the other beast that appeared inside the cabin had ripped the creature's head off, getting the attention of the one who still had a dirty hand in my stomach. The taller monster appeared, scared for the first time. We were both staring at a massive gray wolf devouring a thin body. It lifted a large head, then angry gray eyes landed on their next target. The tall man darted away, trying to run around the couch and behind the wolf. Within a second, the wolf changed to more of a human appearance. It stood on 2 legs with a human upper body covered in fur. It caught the skinny monster with a powerful hand and easily ripped off the arm it took hold of. The creature screamed as it also changed, trying to fight back. The head was nothing more than a mouth ready to bite down on anything in its way. But the thin monster was outmatched. It was taken apart in seconds by the larger wolf that covered the inside of the cabin with its dark blood. I was fading at that point. I fell to the ground, the pain eased into a comfortable numbness. If Hemlock was all right, I knew it would be fine to accept my fate. All the fear I had felt slowly started to drain away. Someone had lifted me off the ground, and I faintly heard a voice calling out my name. I forced my eyes open to see a blurry vision of the boy I found in a storm. His eyes were wet with tears. My brain didn't understand his words, but I knew he was asking something. I closed my eyes again, considering what I should do. A second ago, I was ready to go back to my wife and son. After seeing him, I knew I needed to stay around for a little bit longer. Using the last of my strength, I agreed to what he asked. Then a set of teeth came down on my shoulder, causing a new wave of hot pain to flash through my body. I fell into a deep sleep as something came flooding into my bloodstream. It was uncomfortable, and I feared who I would become when I woke up again. When I did wake up, I was in the bedroom of the cabin. My stomach and any other injuries were healed over as if they never happened, aside from a set of scars showing a bite on my shoulder. I got up feeling oddly light. The sunlight appeared to be too bright, and the birds outside were far louder than I remember. Someone had tried to clean the cabin. Dark blood still stained the wood, but the bodies had been removed. Hemlock waited for me outside, wearing more borrowed clothing and appearing almost remorseful. "This wasn't your fault." I told him to make sure to get that out of the way first. "It was. I should never have entered the cabin with you. I believed in my father's strength and was positive he would win against our attackers. There were 10 of them. He stayed behind to let me get away." He sounded so guilty it hurt. I know it hurts being left behind, but he was a good father. It's the parents' job to protect their kids. I didn't do that. I couldn't do anything for my son. Clearly, he disagreed and voiced that opinion by punching my arm. I rubbed the spot where he hit, offended. "I bet he would have done the same thing if he heard you saying that." Hemlock argued. "He was a good kid. I'm glad his father protected him, but I wish they could have stayed together. How am I even alive right now?" I asked, getting back to the important stuff. He looked guilty again and kicked at the dirt with bare feet. "Well, I turned you into one of us. I'm sorry, but it was the only way," he admitted. "I kind of figured it was something like that. Now what? Am I going to turn into a wolf every full moon and devour backpackers?" He wrinkled his nose at the suggestion and shook his head. "No. It'll take a few days before you'll be able to fully transform. With enough strength, you'll be able to do it any time it's needed. I normally spend most of my time as a wolf. But there is a way to prevent that. If you drink a certain tea before your first change, the wolf inside you will be locked away forever." I crossed my arms, uncertain of how I felt about that. I could still leave these woods as a human to go about a normal life. Or I could become a wolf and discover a new life involving monsters made up of nightmares. What's stopping people from abusing this? Like cheating death by getting bitten any time they're about to die and drinking the tea to avoid the whole wolf thing? I wondered out loud. No one had survived being bitten twice. And a bitten wolf has a shorter lifespan than a born wolf. You'll most likely only live till you're 40. So, maybe 5 more years? Is that how old you think I am?" I said while uncrossing my arms, very peeved by his misjudgment. He looked very nervous about upsetting me. When I smiled, it made him calm down. I thought over my choices again, really wondering if I could throw away being human. What's up with those thing creatures? Are there a lot more of them? Hemlock nodded, his face grim, thinking about what attacked us. "We're unsure of their numbers, but it feels as if more appear every summer. Attacks from them have become more common, even though we can't ever prove it. I fear another war will break out between us that will hurt humans that get caught in the middle." Hearing something like that would make someone want to never take another step inside the forest again. If I stayed, I would risk my already shortened life to get caught up in an enviable war between monsters. I guess you need one more wolf on your side. Give me 3 days to get some things in order. Since I didn't have any family left, it was easy to take care of things. I sold the higher cost items and then donated what I could. I kept some clothing and some savings. It felt oddly freeing to get rid of most of my worldly goods, knowing they would be far more useful to someone else. I met Hemlock back at the cabin, ready to start a different life. He said that his family didn't mind welcoming a newcomer into their ranks, but they thought that I should live at the cabin for a bit longer and slowly get introduced to their way of life. No matter how afraid the idea of more of those thin monsters made me, I decided to protect Hemlock in the same way his father had. After all, it's a parent's job to take care of their children.